The distant thunder rumbled across the vast Montana sky as Abram Pierce stood at the edge of his property, watching the approaching storm with eyes that had seen too much sorrow for a man of 32. The year was 1878, and the promise of spring hung in the air, though winter's grip hadn't fully loosened from the rolling hills surrounding his modest ranch. His calloused hands gripped the wooden fence post, knuckles white with tension as he spotted the familiar silhouette of a horse and rider approaching from the east. "Papa," 5-year-old Samuel's voice rang out from behind him. "Is that Miss Willow?" Abram turned to his son, whose small face was alight with hope. The boy had his mother's eyes deep brown and expressive, a constant reminder of what they had both lost. "No, son, that's just Mr. Henderson coming to check on the herd." The disappointment that washed over Samuel's face was swift and complete. He had been asking about Willow Jensen for 3 weeks now, ever since she had packed her bags and left the ranch with tears streaming down her face. "When is she coming back?" Samuel asked, his bottom lip quivering slightly. Abram knelt down, the mud from yesterday's rain soaking through his worn denim at the knees. He placed his hands on his son's shoulders, trying to find the right words. "Miss Willow. She's gone to California, Samuel. Remember we talked about this. She got that teaching position she always wanted." "But she didn't say goodbye to me," Samuel protested, his small fists clenching at his sides. "She always sings me to sleep, every night." The truth of it stabbed Abram in the chest. Willow had left without saying goodbye to Samuel, knowing the boy would break her resolve. She had only been their housekeeper for 8 months, hired after Samuel's mother, Elizabeth, had succumbed to pneumonia the previous year. But in that time, she had become much more than that to both of them. "I know, son," Abram said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know." As Mr. Henderson dismounted from his horse and approached them, Samuel turned his face up to his father, tears welling in his eyes. "If she's gone, who'll sing me to sleep now?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswered, as heavy as the storm clouds gathering overhead. "Evening, Abram," Henderson called, tipping his hat. "Looks like rain's coming in hard tonight." Abram nodded, straightening up and placing a protective hand on Samuel's shoulder. "George, what brings you out this way?" "Got word from town," Henderson said, his expression grave beneath his bushy gray eyebrows. "Thought you should know stagecoach heading west was held up near Devil's Pass, 2 passengers wounded." Abram's heart seized in his chest. "When?" "Yesterday afternoon. Jenkins rode through with the news this morning." "Any names?" Abram asked, trying to keep his voice steady as Samuel leaned against his leg. Listening, Henderson shook his head. "No specifics, just that it was the westbound stage to Sacramento. The same stage Willow had boarded 3 days ago." Abram swallowed hard. "Samuel, go inside and help Mrs. Larson with the dinner preparations." "But Papa, now, son." Samuel trudged reluctantly toward the house, casting worried glances over his shoulder. "That woman who was working for you, she was on that stage, wasn't she?" Henderson asked once Samuel was out of earshot. Abram nodded, his jaw tight. "She was headed to California, teaching position." Henderson sighed, looking out toward the darkening horizon. "Sheriffs organized a posse. They rode out this morning." "I need to go," Abram said, the decision immediate and absolute. "What about the boy?" "Mrs. Larson can stay with him. She's looked after him before." Henderson studied Abram's face. "This isn't just about a former employee, is it?" Abram turned away, unwilling to answer. The truth was complicated. Willow had arrived on his doorstep last summer, a young widow of 26 seeking work after her husband's death left her penniless. She'd been educated back east before marrying and moving west, and had a gentle way with Samuel that had healed something in the boy that Abram hadn't been able to reach. As for Abram himself, he had tried to keep his distance, to respect the proper boundaries between employer and employee. But Willow's quiet strength, her kindness, and the way she'd brought light back into their home had gradually worn down his defenses. They had grown closer over the cold winter months, sharing stories by the fire after Samuel was asleep, her soft laughter warming the kitchen on bitter mornings. But he had never acted on his feelings, never spoken them aloud, and now she was gone, possibly hurt or worse. "I need to find her, George," Abram said simply. "I need to know she's safe." Henderson nodded. I figured as much. I'll help you get ready. The two men walked toward the house, the wind picking up around them, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of change. Inside, Abram found Mrs. Larson, a widow from the neighboring farm, who occasionally helped with household tasks, stirring a pot of stew while Samuel set the table. Mrs. Larson, I need to ride out tonight. There's been trouble with the stagecoach Miss Jensen was on. The older woman's eyes widened with concern. Oh, dear Lord, is she? I don't know. Abram cut in, glancing meaningfully at Samuel. But I need to find out. Can you stay with Samuel for a few days? Of course, Mr. Pierce. I'll pack a bag and be back before dark. Papa, where are you going? Samuel asked, abandoning his task to rush to his father's side. Abram hesitated, then knelt down. I'm going to find Miss Willow, son. Hope bloomed on Samuel's face, and bring her back. The question caught Abram off guard. He couldn't make such a promise. I'm going to make sure she's safe. That's all I can say for now. Samuel's eyes, so like his mother's, searched Abram's face. She was crying when she left. I saw her from my window. Abram's breath caught. You did. She was looking at the house and crying. I think she misses us too. Something shifted in Abram's chest, a flicker of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Maybe she does, son. Within the hour, Abram had packed supplies and saddled his most reliable horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Rusty. Henderson had already ridden ahead to inform the sheriff that Abram would be joining the search. Standing at the gate, Abram embraced Samuel tightly. You mind Mrs. Larson now? I'll be back as soon as I can. Promise you'll find her, Papa, Samuel whispered against his neck. I'll do my best. As Abram mounted his horse, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Samuel stood beside Mrs. Larson, his small face solemn and trusting. Safe travels, Mr. Pierce, Mrs. Larson called over the rising wind. With a final nod, Abram turned his horse toward the east road and rode into the gathering storm, his mind filled with images of Willow, her honey-brown hair, her gentle smile, and the sorrow in her green eyes the last time they had spoken. I have to go, she had said, standing in his study with her resignation letter in hand. This position, it's what I've always wanted. Of course, he had replied, maintaining his composure even as something inside him crumbled. You've been a tremendous help to us, Miss Jensen. Samuel and I will miss you greatly. And I will miss you both, she had whispered, her voice breaking slightly. He should have said more then, should have asked her to stay. But the memory of Elizabeth, gone just over a year, had held him back. The fear of caring for someone and losing them again had silenced the words in his throat. Now, as he rode through the deepening darkness with rain soaking through his coat, Abram Pierce was determined not to make the same mistake twice. If Willow Jensen was alive, he would find her. And this time, he would speak the truth that lay in his heart. The rain continued throughout the night, turning the roads to mud and slowing Abram's progress. By dawn, he had reached the small town of Clearwater, where he stopped briefly to rest his horse and gather information. The local saloon was already open, with a few bleary-eyed patrons nursing their morning drinks. Looking for Sheriff Donovan's posse, Abram announced as he entered, water dripping from his hat and coat. They rode out yesterday, tracking the men who hit the westbound stage. A grizzled barkeeper wiped his hands on a stained cloth. They came through all right, left about 4 hours before first light, headed for Devil's Pass. Any word on the passengers, the wounded? The barkeeper's expression darkened. One died old fellow traveling to see his daughter. The other was a woman, schoolteacher type. They brought her here to Doc Wilson's place. Abram's heart hammered against his ribs. This woman, did you get her name? Jensen, I think. Pretty little thing with light brown hair. Relief and fear warred within Abram. Where's the doctor's office? End of the street, white house with the green shutters. Abram was out the door before the man could say another word, striding through the muddy street with purpose. The doctor's house was modest but well-maintained, with a small sign indicating his profession hanging beside the door. Abram knocked firmly. After a moment, an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose opened the door. Can I help you? I'm looking for Willow Jensen. I heard she was brought here after the stagecoach robbery. The doctor studied him with shrewd eyes. And you are, Abram Pierce. I'm a friend. She's been asking for a Samuel. That you, my son, Abram clarified. Miss Jensen was our housekeeper until recently. She was very close with my boy. The doctor seemed to make a decision and stepped back. Come in then. She's got a nasty wound to her shoulder, but she'll live. Bullet went clean through, missed anything vital. She's been feverish, though. Abram followed him through a small waiting area into a back room that had been converted into a recovery space. There, lying on a narrow bed with her face pale against the white pillows, was Willow. Her honey-brown hair was loose around her shoulders, and a bandage was visible beneath the collar of her nightgown. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. "Willow," Abram whispered, moving to her bedside. Her eyelids fluttered at the sound of his voice, then opened slowly. Those green eyes he'd thought about for days widened with surprise. "Abram, is that really you?" "It's me," he said, reaching for her hand, which felt too warm in his grasp. "I heard about the robbery and came to find you." "Samuel," she asked weakly. "He's safe at home with Mrs. Larson." "He misses you terribly." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't say goodbye to him. I couldn't. It was too hard." Abram pulled a chair close to her bed and sat, still holding her hand. "Why did you really leave, Willow?" She turned her face away, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You know why." "I need to hear you say it." Willow's gaze returned to his, vulnerability and determination mingling in her expression. "Because I was falling in love with you. Because every day in your house was wonderful torture, being so close to you and Samuel, being part of your lives but not truly belonging." "You did belong," Abram said fervently. "You do belong." "As what, Abram? Your housekeeper, the woman who cooks your meals and tends to your son. I wanted more than that, and it wasn't my place to ask for it." The doctor cleared his throat from the doorway. "I'll give you folks some privacy. Miss Jensen needs rest, though, so don't tire her out." When they were alone, Abram leaned closer. "You should have told me. You're still grieving Elizabeth. I saw her picture on your desk, the way you still wear your wedding ring. I couldn't intrude on that." Abram glanced down at the gold band on his finger, a symbol of a love that had been real and precious, but was now part of his past. "I will always honor Elizabeth's memory. She was Samuel's mother, my wife, and I loved her deeply." Willow nodded, pain flickering across her features that had nothing to do with her wound. "But," Abram continued, his voice growing stronger, "these past months with you have taught me that the heart can heal, that it's possible to cherish what was while embracing what could be." Hope trembled in Willow's eyes. "What are you saying, Abram?" "I'm saying that the night you told me you were leaving, I should have asked you to stay. I'm saying that my home hasn't been the same without your presence in it. Samuel asks for you every night at bedtime because no one sings to him the way you do." Willow's free hand moved to touch his cheek. "And what about you? What do you ask for?" "A second chance," Abram said simply. "For both of us." The ghost of a smile touched Willow's lips. "What about my teaching position? There's a school in Mill Creek, just 15 miles from the ranch. They've been looking for a teacher since Mrs. Thornton retired last fall." Willow's eyes widened. "You've thought about this?" "I have, but only if it's what you want." "I would never ask you to give up your dreams." "My dream," Willow said softly, "was to teach, yes, but also to have a family, to belong somewhere with someone." Abram raised her hand to his lips. "Come home with us, Willow, not as our housekeeper, but as whatever you want to be. Whatever we might become to each other, given time." Before she could answer, the door opened and Sheriff Donovan entered, his weathered face grim beneath his hat. "Pierce, thought I might find you here." Abram stood, reluctantly releasing Willow's hand. "Sheriff, any word on the men who did this?" "We tracked them to a camp about 10 miles south, caught 2, but their leader got away, Jesse Blackwell." Willow gasped at the name, and Abram turned to her. "You know him." "He was on the stage," she said, her voice trembling. "He sat across from me, seemed like a gentleman. Then when the robbery started, he pulled out his gun and joined the robbers. He's the one who shot me when I tried to stop him from taking an elderly man's wedding ring." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Blackwell's been working that angle for months. Rides as a passenger, scouts the other travelers for valuables, then signals his gang. This time they got greedy, tried to take the Wells Fargo shipment too." "And the other passenger, the man who died?" Abram asked. "Mr. Sullivan," Willow said, her voice catching. "He was going to Sacramento to live with his daughter after his wife passed away. He showed me a daguerreotype of her and her children, his grandchildren. He was so excited to meet them. Abram saw the grief and guilt in her eyes. You tried to help him. It wasn't enough. Blackwell shot him when he protested the robbery, right in the chest. The sheriff cleared his throat. We'll get Blackwell, Miss Jensen. My men are still tracking him. For now, you should focus on recovering. After the sheriff left, Abram returned to Willow's bedside. The doctor says you need to rest. Will you stay? She asked, suddenly looking vulnerable. At least until I fall asleep. I'll stay as long as you need me to, Abram promised. As Willow's eyes grew heavy, she murmured, Samuel asked who would sing to him, didn't he? He did, Abram confirmed. The day you left, he asked if she's gone, who'll sing me to sleep now? A tear slipped from the corner of Willow's eye. I should never have left like that. Rest now, Abram said gently. We'll make it right. As Willow drifted into sleep, Abram maintained his vigil, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest and planning their journey home once she was strong enough to travel. Outside, the rain had finally stopped and sunlight began to filter through the window, casting a warm glow across Willow's peaceful face. For 3 days, Abram remained in Clearwater, dividing his time between Willow's sick room and the telegraph office where he sent messages to Mrs. Larson, assuring her and Samuel that he was safe and would be returning soon, hopefully with company. Each day, Willow grew stronger, the color returning to her cheeks and her spirit brightening despite the lingering pain of her injury. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as Abram sat reading aloud from a worn copy of Ivanhoe that he'd found in the doctor's waiting room, a commotion outside drew their attention. Shouts and the pounding of hooves filled the street. Abram moved to the window to see several riders dismounting in front of the sheriff's office, one man being roughly handled as they led him inside. What is it? Willow asked, sitting up in bed. Looks like the posse is back. They've got someone with them, Doctor. Wilson burst into the room moments later, his face animated. They've caught Blackwell, found him trying to cross the river at Harmon's Ford. Relief washed over Willow's face, followed quickly by apprehension. Will there be a trial? Judge Patterson's due in town tomorrow, the doctor confirmed. They'll hold him till then. After the doctor left, Willow turned troubled eyes to Abram. I'll need to testify. Only if you're well enough, Abram said, concerned. I need to do this for Mr. Sullivan, for his family. Abram nodded, understanding her determination. Then we'll stay until it's done. The following morning, Judge Patterson arrived as promised, and the makeshift courthouse, usually the town hall, was prepared for the trial. Dr. Wilson declared Willow well enough to attend, but insisted she use a wheelchair to conserve her strength. Abram pushed her into the crowded room, feeling her tension as they entered. The townsfolk had turned out in force, along with travelers delayed by the ongoing investigation. At the front of the room, Jesse Blackwell sat in chains, his once fine clothes now dirty and torn. He was younger than Abram had expected, perhaps 30, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes that swept over the crowd. When those eyes landed on Willow, a slow, malicious smile spread across his face. Abram instinctively stepped closer to her chair, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. The trial proceeded with surprising efficiency. The 2 captured gang members had already confessed, implicating Blackwell as their leader in exchange for lighter sentences. The stage driver testified about the ambush, and the Wells Fargo agent described the stolen shipment. Then it was Willow's turn. Abram helped her from the wheelchair to the witness chair, remaining close as she swore her oath on the Bible. Her voice was clear and steady as she recounted the events of the robbery, how Blackwell had seemed like an ordinary traveler until the stage stopped, how he had revealed himself as part of the gang and shot both her and Mr. Sullivan when they resisted. He took particular pleasure in it, she said, looking directly at Blackwell. He laughed when Mr. Sullivan fell. Blackwell's attorney, a rumpled man with alcohol on his breath, attempted to discredit her testimony, suggesting she was confused due to her injury. But Willow remained unshaken, her green eyes flashing with righteous anger. I will never forget his face, she stated firmly, or what he did to a kind old man whose only crime was wanting to protect a gift from his late wife. By late afternoon, the jury had reached their verdict, guilty on all counts. Judge Patterson sentenced Blackwell to hang, the execution to be carried out in 1 week's time. As the courtroom cleared, Sheriff Donovan approached them. "You did well, Miss Jensen. Your testimony sealed his fate." "Will Mr. Sullivan's family know what happened to him?" she asked. "I sent a telegram to his daughter in Sacramento," the sheriff assured her. "She's already responded, said her father wrote about the kind schoolteacher he met on the stage, wanted to thank you for trying to help him." Tears filled Willow's eyes. "I wish I could have done more." "You did what you could," Abram said gently, "and today you helped bring him justice." That evening, as Abram helped Willow back to her room at the doctor's house, she seemed deep in thought. "What's troubling you?" he asked as he settled her on the edge of the bed. "I was thinking about Mr. Sullivan, about how excited he was to start a new chapter in his life, even after losing his wife. How brave that was." Abram sat beside her. "It takes courage to begin again." "Yes," Willow agreed, turning to face him. "And I've made a decision. I won't be going to California." Hope surged within him. "And the teaching position, I'll write to them tomorrow declining the offer." A small smile played at her lips. "I think I'll inquire about that opening in Mill Creek instead." "Are you certain?" Abram asked, taking her hands in his. "I don't want you to have regrets." "My only regret would be not following my heart." Her gaze was steady, her voice sure. "My heart is with you and Samuel." "It has been for months." Abram raised one hand to cup her cheek. "When can you travel? Samuel asks about you in every telegram." "Dr. Wilson says I should be strong enough by the end of the week. I'll need to take it slowly, but I want to go home, Abram, to your home." "Our home," he corrected gently. "If you'll have us." The kiss that followed was tender, a promise sealed between them as the setting sun cast long shadows across the room. It was a beginning tentative and hopeful, forged in the aftermath of violence but reaching toward peace. 5 days later, Willow was declared well enough to travel, though Dr. Wilson insisted on a careful journey with frequent stops to rest. Abram had arranged for a small wagon with a padded bench and a canopy to shield her from the sun, purchasing it from a local farmer who was upgrading to a larger model. "We'll take it slow," Abram promised as he helped her into the wagon. 3 days instead of the usual 2. The road home was rutted but dry, the spring weather holding fair as they made their way northwest toward Abram's ranch. Each night, they stopped at farmhouses or small inns along the route, where word of the stagecoach heroine had preceded them, ensuring they received the best accommodations available. On the third day, as the familiar rolling hills of Abram's land came into view, Willow sat up straighter on the wagon seat. "There it is," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd see it again." Abram reached for her hand, having second thoughts. "Not one," she assured him, squeezing his fingers. "I just never imagined I could be this happy again after losing Thomas." They had spoken of their respective losses during the journey. Abram's Elizabeth, taken by pneumonia after a harsh winter. Willow's Thomas, killed in a mining accident just 6 months after their wedding. 2 young people who had known grief beyond their years, now cautiously embracing the possibility of joy once more. As they approached the ranch, a small figure burst from the house and ran toward the gate, followed by Mrs. Larson's more sedate pace. "Is that," Willow began, her voice catching. "Samuel," Abram confirmed, smiling as his son waved frantically. He slowed the wagon as they reached the gate, bringing it to a stop just as Samuel arrived, out of breath and wide-eyed. "Miss Willow," he cried, bouncing on his toes. "You came back." Abram jumped down and lifted his son into his arms. "Careful now, son. Miss Willow's been hurt, so we need to be gentle with her." Samuel's expression grew serious as he noticed the sling supporting Willow's left arm. "Did the bad men hurt you?" "A little," Willow admitted. "But I'm getting better every day. Papa said you got shot trying to help someone." "I did," she said softly. "Sometimes standing up for others means taking risks." Samuel nodded solemnly, digesting this information with the particular gravity of childhood. Then his face brightened. "Does this mean you'll sing to me again? Tonight?" Willow's eyes met Abram's over the boy's head, both of them remembering his plaintive question that had haunted Abram on the night she left. "If that's all right with your father," she said. I think that can be arranged, Abram agreed, setting Samuel down. Now let's help Miss Willow inside. She needs to rest. Mrs. Larson approached, her round face beaming. Welcome back, Miss Jensen. The house hasn't been the same without you. With Abram's assistance, Willow descended carefully from the wagon. Samuel immediately took her right hand, as if afraid she might vanish again if he didn't maintain contact. I baked apple pie, Mrs. Larson informed them, and there's a venison stew simmering for dinner. That sounds wonderful, Willow said gratefully. I've missed your cooking, Mrs. Larson. As they walked toward the house, Samuel chattered about everything Willow had missed, how his pet rabbit had escaped its hutch, how he'd helped feed the chickens every morning, how he'd practiced his letters using the slate and chalk she'd left for him. And I kept your room just like it was, he added proudly. Papa said not to touch anything because you might come back. Willow glanced at Abram, who looked slightly embarrassed. I didn't want to disturb your things, he explained. It felt presumptuous. The house was exactly as Willow remembered it, the solid wooden furniture, the colorful rag rugs she'd helped make during the long winter evenings, the shelves of books that had been Elizabeth's pride and joy. Yet something was different. It felt more like coming home than returning to a place of employment. Mrs. Larson insisted on serving them tea in the sitting room, fussing over Willow's comfort and positioning pillows to support her injured shoulder. Samuel refused to leave Willow's side, eventually climbing onto the sofa beside her to show her the reader he'd been practicing with. He's read that story every night, Mrs. Larson whispered to Abram as they stood near the doorway, said it was Miss Jensen's favorite. Abram nodded, watching Willow patiently helping Samuel sound out a difficult word, her good arm around his shoulders. She belongs here, he said quietly. I was a fool not to see it sooner. Better late than never, Mrs. Larson replied with a knowing smile. Some things are worth waiting for. That evening, after a hearty dinner that Willow managed to eat one-handed despite Samuel's eager assistance, Abram helped her upstairs to her room. The familiar space had indeed been preserved just as she'd left it, though someone presumably misses. Larson had placed a vase of fresh wildflowers on the dresser. Tomorrow we'll talk about arrangements, Abram said as he lit the lamp beside her bed. Your recovery, the teaching position in Mill Creek, and us, what we might be to each other. Willow nodded, suddenly shy despite the understanding they'd reached in Clearwater. I'd like that. A soft knock interrupted them, and Samuel appeared in the doorway in his nightshirt, a small book clutched to his chest. Is it time for my story, Miss Willow, and my song? Abram gave her a questioning look, concerned about her energy after the journey. I did promise, Willow said with a smile, and I never want to break another promise to this young man. Samuel beamed, hurrying to the bedside. Abram lifted him onto the bed, cautioning him again about Willow's injury. The boy settled carefully beside her as she opened the book, The Children's Crusade, a collection of moral tales that had been Samuel's favorite since winter. Just one story tonight, Abram said firmly. Miss Willow needs her rest. After the story, Samuel looked up expectantly. Now the song. Willow's voice was soft but clear as she began the lullaby she had sung to him nearly every night during her time with them, a gentle melody about stars watching over sleeping children. Samuel's eyelids grew heavy as she sang, his small body relaxing against the pillows. By the time she finished, he was nearly asleep. Abram gathered him into his arms, the boy's head lolling against his shoulder. Good night, Miss Willow, Samuel murmured drowsily. Good night, sweet boy, she replied, pressing a light kiss to his forehead. As Abram carried his son to his room across the hall, Willow felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, not in a distant classroom in Sacramento, but here with this small family who had carved out a place for her in their hearts. Abram returned moments later, standing in the doorway with an expression of profound gratitude. You have no idea what that meant to him. To both of us. I think I do, Willow said softly, because it meant just as much to me. He crossed to her bedside and took her hand. Get some rest, we have all the time in the world now. As she drifted toward sleep that night, Willow thought about the journey that had brought her here, the loss of her husband, the desperate search for work that had led her to Abram's door, the growing attachment to Samuel, and the slow, inevitable falling in love with a man who carried his own grief with quiet dignity. It hadn't been an easy path, but lying there in the darkness of the room that was once again hers, Willow knew she wouldn't change a single step. The following weeks saw Willow's strength returning gradually. Dr. Matthews from Mill Creek visited regularly to check her wound, pronouncing her recovery remarkable given the severity of the injury. By mid-May, she was able to discard the sling, though her left arm remained weaker than before. During this time, Abram and Willow carefully negotiated the shift in their relationship. Propriety demanded certain considerations. Mrs. Larson continued to visit daily, providing both household help and a chaperone's presence. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows in the community, but the circumstances of Willow's injury and her previous employment in the household offered some protection from the worst of the gossip. For Samuel, the transition was seamless. Having Willow back in the house was all that mattered to him, and he flourished under her attention, his reading improving rapidly, and his natural curiosity finding an eager guide in Willow's love of learning. In late May, Willow received a letter confirming her appointment as teacher at the Mill Creek School to begin in September after the harvest. The position came with a small cottage beside the schoolhouse, which posed a new question for her and Abram to address. "You don't have to take the cottage," Abram said as they walked slowly around the perimeter of the vegetable garden one evening, Samuel racing ahead to chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "You could continue living here and ride into town each day." Willow considered the implications of his suggestion. People would talk more than they already do. "Let them," Abram said, his jaw set stubbornly. "We know the truth of our arrangement." "Which is what, exactly?" Willow asked, stopping to face him. "I'm not your housekeeper anymore." "I'm not your wife. What am I to you, Abram?" He took both her hands in his. "You're the woman I love, the one I want to build a future with. I didn't want to rush you." Willow's heart swelled at his declaration. "I love you too, I have for so long." "Then marry me," he said simply. "Not someday, not when it's proper, but now, soon, before the summer's out." A laugh bubbled up from Willow's chest, joy spilling over after being contained for so long. Yes, I'll marry you." Their kiss was interrupted by Samuel's return, the boy launching himself at them with typical enthusiasm. "Did you see the fireflies? There are hundreds." Abram lifted his son with his free arm, keeping his other hand firmly clasped with Willow's. "Samuel, Miss Willow and I have something important to tell you." The boy looked between them expectantly. "We're going to be married," Abram said. "Miss Willow is going to become my wife, and she'll be part of our family officially." Samuel's brow furrowed. "Does that mean I have to call her mother now?" Willow quickly shook her head. "No, Samuel. Your mother will always be your mother. Nothing can change that. You can continue calling me Miss Willow if you like, or we can figure out something else that feels right to you." The boy thought about this seriously for a moment. "When will you get married?" "Soon," Abram answered, "before the summer ends." "And will you still sing to me every night?" Willow smiled, her heart full. "Every single night that I'm home, I promise." Samuel seemed satisfied with this arrangement. "Good, can we have cake at the wedding? With frosting?" The adults laughed, the moment of potential awkwardness dissolving in the face of a child's practical concerns. "The biggest cake you've ever seen," Abram promised. "With the sweetest frosting in all of Montana territory." As they walked back to the house together, Samuel skipping ahead once more, Abram squeezed Willow's hand. "Are you sure about this, about us?" Willow looked up at the man beside her, this steadfast, honorable man who had ridden through a storm to find her when she was hurt. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The wedding took place in early August, when the wildflowers were at their peak, and the days were long and golden. The ceremony was held at the ranch, under an arch of twisted willow branches that Abram and his ranch hands had constructed beside the small pond where cattails swayed in the summer breeze. Guests came from Mill Creek and the surrounding farms, Mrs. Larson and her sons, Dr. Matthews and his wife, the families whose children would soon be Willow's pupils, and the workers from Abram's ranch. Even Sheriff Donovan made the journey from Clearwater, bringing news that Jesse Blackwell had been executed as sentenced, meeting his end with the same cold arrogance he had displayed at his trial. "Thought you should know," the sheriff told Willow privately before the ceremony. The Sullivan family sent their regards too, said knowing justice was done has helped them find peace. Willow wore a dress of pale blue silk, not white, as neither she nor Abram were entering this marriage as untouched innocents, but fresh and hopeful as the summer sky. Her honey-brown hair was adorned with tiny white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of purple coneflowers and golden black-eyed Susans. Samuel, scrubbed clean and uncomfortable in a new suit, served as ring-bearer, solemnly carrying the simple gold bands on a small velvet cushion. When the minister asked who gave this woman in marriage, it was Samuel who stepped forward with Mrs. Larson's coaching to declare, "My papa and I do." The vows they exchanged were traditional but deeply felt, their voices steady as they promised to love and honor one another through all the seasons of life to come. When Abram slipped the ring onto Willow's finger, his hands trembled slightly, the only outward sign of the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Pierce." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet conveying the depth of their commitment. As they turned to face their guests, Samuel rushed forward to embrace them both, completing the circle of their newly formed family. The celebration continued well into the evening, with tables set up beneath the cottonwood trees and lanterns hanging from the branches. There was music from local fiddlers, dancing on a wooden platform constructed for the occasion, and, as promised, a magnificent cake with white frosting that left Samuel with a sugary mustache and a look of complete satisfaction. As twilight deepened into night, guests gradually departed, calling out final congratulations and well wishes. When only the closest friends remained, Abram found Willow sitting on a bench near the pond, watching as Mrs. Larson supervised Samuel and a few other children in a game of tag. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "How does it feel?" "Perfect," Willow replied, leaning against his shoulder. "I keep thinking about how different everything was just a few months ago, how lost I felt on that stagecoach heading away from here, away from you. And now I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Samuel ran up to them, breathless and flushed with excitement. "Is it time for my song yet? Mrs. Larson says I have to go to bed soon." Willow laughed, opening her arms to him. "Yes, it's time. Let's go inside and get you settled." Together, the three of them walked to the house, their house now, truly a home for all of them. As they reached the porch, Abram paused, looking back at the remnants of their wedding celebration, the lanterns still glowing among the trees, the musicians packing their instruments, friends lingering over final glasses of punch and slices of cake. "Thank you," he said quietly to Willow. "For what?" "For coming back, for giving us a second chance." She reached up to touch his cheek, her new ring catching the lamplight from the porch. "Thank you for coming to find me." Inside, they helped Samuel prepare for bed, the boy chattering excitedly about the day's events even as his eyelids grew heavy. When he was tucked under the quilt, Willow sat on the edge of his bed as she had nearly every night since her return. "What song would you like tonight?" she asked, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "The star one," Samuel said sleepily, "the one about the stars watching over me." As Willow began to sing, her voice soft and sweet in the quiet room, Abram leaned against the doorframe, watching his wife and son with a heart so full it threatened to burst. This, he thought, was what healing looked like, not the absence of grief or the forgetting of those lost, but the courage to open oneself to new joy, new love, new life. When Samuel's breathing deepened into sleep, Willow carefully rose and joined Abram at the door. Together they looked at the peacefully slumbering child. "He'll be all right now," Willow whispered. "We all will." Abram led her from the room, closing the door softly behind them. "Welcome home, Mrs. Pierce," he said, gathering her into his arms. "Welcome home at last." 5 years later, Abram stood at the same gate where he had once watched Willow ride away, this time observing a very different scene. The ranch had prospered during these years, the house expanded to accommodate their growing family, the herd increased, and new outbuildings constructed to support their operations. But the most significant changes weren't in the physical landscape. They were in the people who inhabited it. Samuel, now 10, sat astride his own pony, proudly demonstrating his riding skills to his 3-year-old sister, Eleanor, who clapped her hands in delight from her perch on Willow's hip. Beside them stood Jacob, not yet 2, still unsteady on his feet but determined to keep up with his siblings. Willow had continued teaching at the Mill Creek School, riding in 3 days a week, while a junior teacher handled the other 2 days. Her reputation as an educator had grown throughout the county, drawing families to move closer to the district to give their children the benefit of her instruction. Abram watched as she set Eleanor down, the little girl immediately toddling toward her older brother with outstretched arms. "Up, Sammy! Up!" Samuel dismounted with exaggerated care, then lifted his sister onto the saddle, holding the pony's reins firmly as he led it in a small circle. Eleanor's delighted giggles filled the air. "She's fearless," Abram remarked as he approached, scooping up Jacob before the toddler could follow his siblings too closely to the pony's hooves. "Like her father," Willow replied, smiling up at him. The years had added a few fine lines around her eyes, but to Abram, she was more beautiful than ever, her confidence, her strength, and her joy making her radiant. "More like her mother," he countered. "I seem to recall a woman who faced down armed robbers to protect a stranger." Willow shook her head. Ancient history, but it wasn't, not really. The events of that spring had shaped their lives in countless ways, from the scar on Willow's shoulder that sometimes ached before a storm, to the annual letter they received from Mr. Sullivan's daughter in California, to the stories they told their children about courage and standing up for what's right. "Papa," Samuel called, "can we ride out to the north pasture to see the new foals?" "After lunch," Abram promised. "Your mother's made a picnic for us all." The word mother had come naturally to Samuel over time. By the Christmas after their wedding, he had begun using it occasionally, testing it out like a new garment to see if it fit. By the following spring, it had become his preferred way of addressing Willow, though he still sometimes used Miss Willow when feeling particularly thoughtful or nostalgic. Willow had handled the transition with characteristic grace, honoring Elizabeth's memory while fully embracing her role as Samuel's second mother. A portrait of Elizabeth hung in the family parlor, and Samuel knew the story of his birth mother's courage and kindness. It was Willow who had suggested naming their daughter Eleanor Elizabeth, ensuring that the connection remained alive for Samuel. As they gathered for the picnic under the shade of the cottonwoods, Abram surveyed his family with quiet pride. Samuel, growing tall and thoughtful, already showing signs of the man he would become. Eleanor, with her mother's green eyes and her father's determined chin. Jacob, still round-cheeked and solemn, watching his siblings with careful attention. And Willow, his partner, his love, the heart of their home. She had changed his life with her courage and her tenderness, healing wounds he hadn't even recognized were still raw. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, catching his gaze as she passed him a plate of fried chicken. "How lucky I am," Abram answered honestly. "How differently things might have turned out if I hadn't ridden after you that day." Willow's expression softened. "I've wondered about that too. What if you hadn't come? What if I'd continued to California? We might never have known what we could be to each other." "I would have found you eventually," Abram said with certainty, "even if it took years." "Such confidence," she teased, though her eyes shone with emotion, not confidence, necessity. He reached for her hand. "Some people are meant to find each other, no matter what stands in their way." Their moment was interrupted by Eleanor, who scrambled into Willow's lap with a wildflower clutched in her small fist. "Song, Mama, sing the star song." "That's for bedtime, sweetheart," Willow reminded her, "please." The little girl's pleading eyes, so like her mother's, were impossible to resist. As Willow began to sing the familiar lullaby, now a family tradition, Samuel joined in, his changing voice creating a harmony with his mother's clear tones. Even Jacob swayed to the melody, his serious face breaking into a rare, gummy smile. Abram listened, his heart full, remembering a rain-soaked evening when his son had asked a heartbreaking question. If she's gone, who'll sing me to sleep now? The answer sat before him, not just a singer of lullabies, but the woman who had brought music back into all their lives, who had taught them that love wasn't diminished by sharing it, but multiplied. That family could be formed not just by blood, but by choice and commitment. As the song ended, Eleanor clapped her hands. "Again, Mama," later, little one, Willow promised, kissing her daughter's curls. "We have a whole afternoon of adventures ahead of us first." The children scattered to explore the picnic area, Samuel taking charge of his siblings with the seriousness of an older brother who understood responsibility. Abram moved closer to his wife, slipping an arm around her waist. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Only twice," Willow replied with a smile. "You're falling behind schedule." "I love you, Willow Pierce, more than words can express." She leaned into him, her head finding the familiar spot against his shoulder. "And I love you for finding me when I was lost, for bringing me home." Above them, the Montana sky stretched endlessly blue, promising a perfect day for their family outing. But even if storm clouds had gathered, Abram knew they would face it together as they had faced every challenge and joy of the past 5 years. The cowboy who had once said goodbye at the gate had found his way to hello again. And the woman who had left with tears in her eyes had returned to create a home filled with laughter, love, and lullabies that would echo through their lives for all the years to come.